February 12th, 1944. Berlin trembled under a vicious winter storm as Lieutenant Thomas Weber hurried along Unter den Linden Boulevard, his shoulders hunched against the bitter wind. The once grand thoroughfare now stood as a shadow of its former glory, with sandbags protecting storefronts and propaganda posters peeling from walls. Weber believed, like most of his fellow officers, that despite recent setbacks, victory remained inevitable. The momentary hardships, merely temporary inconveniences on the path to greatness. Little did he know that the simple act of kindness he was about to perform would unravel everything he thought he understood about loyalty, duty, and the very cause he had sworn to serve. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the tale of how a chance encounter between two strangers, each harboring secrets from opposite sides of a global conflict, would forge an unlikely connection that would ultimately save hundreds of lives and reveal how the most powerful weapons in war are sometimes not guns or bombs, but compassion and human decency. The temperature had plummeted to 15 degrees below zero that evening. Lieutenant Thomas Weber pulled his military-issued wool coat tighter around his shoulders as he trudged through the accumulating snow. At 32 years of age, Weber served in the German Communications Corps, coordinating telegraph and radio transmissions between Berlin headquarters and field units. His position granted him access to classified intelligence reports and transmission codes, information that many would kill to obtain. "Another late night, Lieutenant," called Gerhard Müller, the elderly newspaper vendor whose kiosk marked the halfway point of Weber's daily walk home. "The workload never lessens, Herr Müller," Weber replied with a tired smile. "Communications must flow smoothly, especially now with the Eastern Front requiring constant attention." "They say the Soviets have been pushed back at Narva," Müller commented, referencing the official news bulletin. "A significant victory for our forces." Weber nodded non-committally. He knew the actual reports told a different story. The Soviet advance had been temporarily halted, but the German forces were dangerously overextended. The public broadcasts trumpeted victories, while classified messages desperately requested reinforcements and supplies. This dissonance between propaganda and reality had been growing in Weber's mind, creating a quiet discomfort he dared not articulate. "Stay warm, Herr Müller," Weber said, continuing his journey. As he approached the Spree River Bridge, Weber noticed a woman standing alone at the railing, wearing only a thin dress and jacket, completely inadequate for the brutal cold. She stared into the dark water below, her body visibly shaking. Something about her stillness amid the swirling snow alarmed him. "Excuse me, Fräulein," Weber called out. "Are you all right?" The woman turned, startled by his voice. Her face was pale, her lips tinged blue from the cold. Despite her disheveled appearance, Weber noted an undeniable elegance in her features, high cheekbones, intelligent eyes, and a certain poise that seemed at odds with her current state. "Yes, thank you," she replied, her German flawless but with the slightest accent Weber couldn't immediately place. "I was just collecting my thoughts." "You'll freeze to death collecting thoughts in this weather," Weber said, already unbuttoning his coat. "Please, take this. I live just around the corner." "I couldn't possibly," she began to protest. "I insist," Weber interrupted, draping his coat around her shoulders. "German officers are meant to be gentlemen, after all." A flash of something, fear, suspicion, crossed her face before being replaced by grateful acknowledgement. "Thank you, Lieutenant, you're very kind." "Thomas Weber," he offered, extending his hand. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. Elise Berger." "Where are you heading, Fräulein Berger? May I escort you? The streets aren't safe for a woman alone, especially in this weather." Elise clutched the coat tighter. I was meant to meet my cousin at Café Kranzler, but she never appeared. I fear she may have been detained by the storm." Weber frowned. Café Kranzler had been closed for renovations for 3 weeks. Either Elise was confused, or she was lying. "The café is closed," he said carefully, watching her reaction. "Perhaps you meant another establishment." Panic flickered across her face before she composed herself. Oh, how foolish of me. Yes, of course, it was Café Einstein on Kurfürstenstrasse. My mistake. Weber nodded, though his suspicions remained. That's quite a distance in this weather. Allow me to accompany you to find a telephone. You can call your cousin from my apartment building. Elise hesitated, her eyes darting to the street behind them. That's very generous, but I wouldn't want to impose. It's no imposition, Weber insisted, now genuinely concerned for this mysterious woman. Whatever her story, she clearly needed help. Please, it would trouble my conscience to leave you out here. After a moment's consideration, Elise nodded. Thank you, Lieutenant Weber. You're a credit to your uniform. As they walked, Weber noted how Elise kept her gaze down when they passed military patrols, and how she flinched at the sound of approaching vehicles. Her behavior suggested someone accustomed to avoiding attention, a dangerous habit in Berlin, where the Gestapo had eyes everywhere. Have you lived in Berlin long? Weber asked conversationally. All my life, she answered, though I spent several years studying in Switzerland. I returned when my father became ill. What did you study? Languages and literature, she replied. I speak French, English, and Russian, all useful for translation work. Weber raised an eyebrow. Russian, that's uncommon. My grandmother was from St. Petersburg, Elise explained quickly. Before the revolution, of course. They arrived at Weber's apartment building, a once elegant structure now showing signs of neglect. The stone steps leading to the entrance were cracked, and the brass fixtures had long since lost their shine. The telephone is in the lobby, Weber said, opening the door. You can make your call while I check my mail. The lobby was empty, except for Frau Schumacher, the building's caretaker, who eyed Elise suspiciously as they entered. Evening, Frau Schumacher, Weber greeted her politely. This is Fräulein Berger. She needs to use the telephone. The older woman nodded curtly, but continued to watch Elise with narrow eyes as she approached the telephone. Weber moved to the row of mailboxes, deliberately giving Elise privacy while remaining within sight. He observed as she dialed, spoke briefly in hushed tones, then hung up. Her posture had changed, the vulnerability she'd displayed on the bridge now replaced with decisive purpose. Any luck? Weber asked, as he returned with his mail. Yes, thank you, Elise replied. My cousin had indeed gone home because of the weather. She's sending her husband to collect me. Excellent. While you wait, perhaps you'd like to come upstairs for some tea. It's warmer than standing here. Elise seemed to weigh her options before nodding. That would be lovely, thank you. Weber's apartment on the 4th floor was modest but neat. Military precision was evident in the orderly arrangement of furniture and the spotless surfaces. Photographs lined one wall. Weber in uniform standing beside other officers. Weber as a younger man with his family. Weber receiving a commendation. Your family? Elise asked, studying the photographs as Weber put a kettle on the stove. Yes, my parents still live in Dresden. My younger brother Ernst serves with the army in Italy. Weber's voice softened. We haven't had news from him in 3 months. Elise's expression shifted to genuine sympathy. I'm sorry. The uncertainty must be difficult. It's the reality for many families, Weber said, his tone measured. One learns to manage hope and fear in equal measure. As Weber prepared the tea, Elise wandered to his desk, where military reports and communication logs were neatly stacked. Her eyes scanned the documents quickly, professionally, a detail Weber noticed but chose not to comment on immediately. Sugar? He asked. Deliberately casual. Elise startled slightly. No, thank you, plain is fine. They sat across from each other at Weber's small dining table, the steaming cups between them creating a fragile sense of normalcy amid the increasingly apparent strangeness of their situation. Your German is excellent, Weber commented, but I detect a slight accent. Not Swiss, I think. Elise's fingers tightened around her cup. My mother was French. Perhaps that's what you hear. Perhaps, Weber conceded, though he recognized that this was not a French accent. Having worked in communications and signals intelligence, he had been trained to identify linguistic patterns. The slight stress on certain consonants, the almost imperceptible elongation of vowels. Her accent was Eastern European, possibly Polish or Czech. How long have you worked in communications, Lieutenant? Elise asked, deftly changing the subject. 3 years now. Before that, I taught mathematics at a gymnasium in Dresden. A teacher becoming a signals officer. A natural progression, I suppose. Both require attention to patterns and details. Weber smiled. Yes, though teaching teenagers prepared me better for war than many might expect. Elise laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her face. For a moment, the tension between them dissolved, revealing two people who, in different circumstances, might have simply enjoyed each other's company over tea. The moment was shattered by a sharp knock at the door. Elise's cup clattered against its saucer. "That must be my cousin's husband," she said, rising quickly. Weber moved to answer, but Elise placed a hand on his arm. "Thank you for your kindness, Lieutenant Weber." Not many would have stopped to help a stranger. There was something final in her tone that gave Weber pause. "Keep the coat," he said. "Return it another time." "Of course, sir," she replied, though both knew she wouldn't. Weber opened the door to find a tall man with a weathered face wearing a driver's cap and heavy coat. "I've come for Fräulein Berger," he announced in a gruff voice. "Hans," Elise exclaimed with obvious relief. "Thank you for coming in this dreadful weather." The man nodded curtly, his eyes taking in Weber's uniform with concealed wariness. "The lieutenant kindly offered shelter while I waited," Elise explained. "I'm indebted to his generosity." "Our thanks," the man said stiffly, offering a quick salute that struck Weber as slightly off, not the gesture of someone accustomed to military protocol. As Elise prepared to leave, she turned to Weber one last time. "Lieutenant, should we meet again, I hope it will be in more peaceful times." Something in her eyes, a mixture of regret and resolve, made Weber suspect that she was saying more than her words conveyed. "I hope so too, Fräulein Berger," he replied. "Safe travels." After they departed, Weber stood in his doorway for several minutes, replaying the encounter in his mind. His training and instincts told him something was amiss, yet he couldn't quite place what troubled him about the mysterious Elise Berger. Returning to his desk, Weber noticed something that sent a chill through him, far colder than the February air. His daily communication logbook had been moved, almost imperceptibly, but enough for someone with his meticulous habits to notice. Opening it, he found nothing missing, but the realization that Elise had been examining his confidential documents confirmed his suspicions. Elise Berger was not who she claimed to be. The following morning, Weber reported to headquarters earlier than usual, his mind still preoccupied with the previous night's encounter. The communications division occupied the third floor of a requisitioned government building near the Tiergarten. Rows of teleprinters and radio equipment filled the main room, operated by a mix of military personnel and civilian women working as telephone exchange operators. "You look troubled, Weber," observed Major Hoffman, his direct superior, as Weber hung his replacement coat on the rack. "Bad news from home?" "No, sir, just a restless night," Weber replied, unwilling to share his concerns until he had more information. "Well, focus on your work today. We're receiving critical updates from the Eastern Front that need immediate processing." Weber nodded and took his position at the encoding station. For the next several hours, he mechanically transcribed and encoded messages, his fingers working automatically while his thoughts remained on Elise. During his lunch break, Weber made his way to the records department on the ground floor. Hauptmann Klaus Richter, an old friend from officer training, worked there cataloging personnel files and security reports. "Thomas, what brings you down to my paper dungeon?" Richter greeted him with a smile. "I need a favor, Klaus," Weber said quietly. "Can you check if there's any record of an Elise Berger in Berlin, possibly with French or Swiss connections?" Richter's smile faded. "Why are you asking? Is this official business?" "Consider it personal curiosity for now," Weber replied carefully. Richter glanced around before lowering his voice. "You know asking questions about civilians without proper authorization is risky, Thomas, especially these days." "I understand, but this is important." After a moment's hesitation, Richter nodded. "Give me until tomorrow. And, Thomas, be careful. The Gestapo has been increasing their presence here. They're particularly interested in communications personnel." Weber returned to his station with a growing sense of unease. The afternoon passed in a blur of encoded messages, many confirming what he already suspected. The situation on all fronts was deteriorating rapidly, despite the official reports claiming otherwise. At 1700 hours, just as Weber was preparing to leave, a priority message came through from a field unit near Minsk. As he decoded it, his blood ran cold. The message reported that a network of spies had been uncovered transmitting German troop movements and strategic plans to Soviet intelligence. Several arrests had been made, but the primary agent, a woman described as having trained in Moscow and operating under multiple aliases, had escaped and was believed to be heading west, possibly to Berlin. The description matched Elise perfectly. Weber sat motionless, the implications washing over him. Had he unknowingly harbored an enemy agent? Worse, had his act of kindness compromised military security? His duty was clear. He should report the encounter immediately. Yet something held him back. The memory of Elise's face when she spoke of his brother. The genuine concern in her eyes. These seemed at odds with the cold calculus of a trained spy. As Weber wrestled with his conscience, Major Hoffman approached his station. "Weber, you're needed for a special assignment. Report to Colonel Brandt's office at 0800 hours tomorrow." "May I ask what the assignment entails, sir?" "Security sweep. We've received intelligence about potential leaks within our communication channels. The Colonel will brief you fully tomorrow." Weber felt his mouth go dry. "Yes, sir." That evening, Weber took a different route home, deliberately passing by the bridge where he had first encountered Elise. There was no sign of her, of course, but he found himself scanning the faces of passers-by nonetheless. His apartment felt different upon his return, as though the brief presence of Elise had somehow altered the space. Weber checked his documents again, searching for any sign of tampering, but found nothing obvious missing or changed. Sleep eluded him that night. Images of Elise mingled with thoughts of his brother Ernst, somewhere in Italy, perhaps wounded or captured. If Ernst were in enemy territory, wouldn't Weber hope for someone there to show him kindness, to see him as a human being rather than merely an enemy? By dawn, Weber had reached a decision. He would wait for Klaus Richter's information before taking any action regarding Elise. When Weber arrived at headquarters the next morning, the atmosphere was noticeably tense. Additional security guards checked identification at every entrance, and unfamiliar men in civilian clothes, clearly Gestapo, stood observing the communications room. Colonel Brandt was a stern-faced man with cold eyes that seemed to evaluate everything in terms of potential threat or utility. His office walls were lined with maps, marking troop positions across Europe and North Africa, each colored pin representing thousands of lives. "Lieutenant Weber," Brandt acknowledged as Weber entered and saluted, "your record indicates exemplary service and unquestionable loyalty." "Thank you, sir. We have a situation that requires discretion and attention to detail, qualities your superiors assure me you possess in abundance." Brandt pushed a folder across his desk. 3 days ago, we intercepted a partial radio transmission from what we believe is a Soviet intelligence cell operating here in Berlin. The message was encoded using a system we haven't fully broken, but our cryptanalysts extracted fragments suggesting a planned extraction of a high-value agent. Weber opened the folder to find signal intercepts and partial translations. His eyes caught the phrase "female agent" and "critical intelligence obtained." "We believe this agent has accessed classified communications regarding our Eastern Front deployments," Brandt continued. "Intelligence that could prove catastrophic if it reaches Moscow. Your task, Lieutenant, is to review all communication logs from the past week to identify any unusual access or transmission patterns." "Yes, sir," Weber replied, maintaining a neutral expression despite the turmoil within. "May I ask if we have any description of this agent?" "Only that she is likely operating under a false identity with forged papers, probably claiming to be a German national who spent time abroad, a common cover that explains any accent or cultural discrepancies." Weber nodded, his suspicions about Elise solidifying with each word. "This is a matter of highest priority, Weber. If this intelligence reaches Soviet command, it could cost thousands of German lives." "I understand, sir. I'll begin immediately." As Weber left Colonel Brandt's office, he nearly collided with Klaus Richter, who quickly pulled him into an empty corridor. "I found nothing on any Elise Berger in Berlin," Richter whispered. "But there's something else. The Gestapo circulated a confidential alert last night about a suspected Soviet agent who escaped a security sweep in the Charlottenburg district. The description is vague, but they're focusing on women between 25 and 35 with possible foreign education. Weber felt his pulse quicken. Anything else? They're searching for the agent's handler or contact, anyone who might have provided shelter, even unknowingly. Richter's eyes narrowed. "Thomas, what have you gotten yourself involved in?" "Nothing," Weber assured him, perhaps too quickly. "Just following up on something suspicious, I noticed." "Well, be careful. The Gestapo aren't known for their subtlety or presumption of innocence." Throughout the day, Weber methodically reviewed communication logs as ordered, all while his mind raced with possibilities. If Elise was indeed the Soviet agent, what had she learned from his apartment? What critical intelligence could she have gathered from the brief exposure to his documents? As evening approached, Weber prepared his report for Colonel Brandt, carefully omitting any mention of his encounter with Elise. He told himself this omission was temporary, until he could determine the full extent of any security breach. When Weber finally left headquarters, darkness had fallen, and the temperature had dropped further. Snow continued to fall, transforming Berlin into a ghostly landscape of white-draped ruins and shadowy figures hurrying through the cold. Approaching his apartment building, Weber immediately sensed something was wrong. The entryway door stood slightly ajar, unusual given the bitter cold. Inside, the lobby was empty, the usual evening sounds of the building muted. Weber climbed the stairs cautiously, his hand instinctively moving to where his service pistol would be if he weren't in civilian clothes. Reaching his floor, he noticed his apartment door was unlatched. A hair-thin red thread he habitually placed across the frame when leaving had been broken. Someone had entered his apartment. Weber considered his options. He could retreat and report the break-in, or he could confront whoever might still be inside. Professional caution warred with personal curiosity, and won. He turned to leave, intending to contact the authorities. "Please don't go, Lieutenant Weber," came a familiar voice from inside his apartment. "I mean you no harm." Elise stood in his doorway, still wearing his military coat, but now with her hair pinned back severely, her posture straighter, more confident. She no longer looked like a vulnerable woman caught in a snowstorm, but rather someone accustomed to dangerous situations. "You should not have returned, Fräulein Berger," Weber said quietly, "if that is indeed your name." "It isn't," she admitted, "but I had to come back. You're in danger." Despite his training and every regulation he had sworn to uphold, Weber found himself following her into his own apartment, closing the door behind them. "The Gestapo visited this building this afternoon," she explained without preamble. "They questioned your neighbors about your activities and associates. A woman fitting my description was reportedly seen entering your building 2 nights ago. Why would you risk coming back to warn me?" Weber asked, keeping his distance. "Because you showed kindness when you had no reason to," she replied simply, "and because I don't believe you deserve what they would do to you if they believed you had knowingly aided me." "And did I? Knowingly aid you?" Something like regret flickered across her face. "No. You offered your coat to a cold stranger, nothing more." Weber studied her, noting the subtle changes in her demeanor, the more precise diction, the calculating gaze that assessed exits and potential weapons. "You're the Soviet agent they're hunting." It wasn't a question, but she nodded nonetheless. "I should report you immediately," Weber said, moving toward the telephone. "You should," she agreed. "It's your duty, just as it's mine, to complete my mission." Weber's hand hovered over the receiver. "And what exactly is your mission? To steal military secrets? To undermine the German war effort?" "My mission is to save lives," she countered. "To shorten a war that's already claimed millions. The information I've gathered will prevent a massive German offensive being planned for April, an offensive that would fail, but cost hundreds of thousands of lives on both sides." Weber's hand dropped from the telephone. "How do you know it would fail?" "Because I've seen the actual production reports and supply capacities," she answered, "not the fabricated numbers your high command circulates. The offensive would stall within days due to fuel shortages alone, leaving your forces exposed to counterattack." Her words matched the classified reports Weber had been encoding for weeks, reports he had tried to ignore the implications of, despite the growing evidence that Germany's position was far more precarious than officially acknowledged. "Lieutenant Weber," she continued, her voice softer now, "Thomas, you're not a fanatic, I can see that. You're a teacher who became a soldier out of duty, not ideology. You value human life. You demonstrated that when you stopped to help a stranger." "You don't know me," Weber insisted, though her words struck uncomfortably close to his unspoken doubts. "I know enough. I know you have a brother fighting in Italy, where German forces are already in retreat, though your newspapers claim otherwise. I know the communications you process daily tell a story of impending defeat, not the victory your leaders promise." Weber felt as though the ground beneath him was shifting. Everything she said aligned with the inconsistencies he had observed, but refused to fully acknowledge. "What is your real name?" he asked finally. She hesitated before answering. Sophia Novak. "Czech? Polish, from Krakow, originally." Weber nodded slowly. "And the man who came for you? Your handler?" "A fellow operative. He's already left Berlin with the intelligence I gathered." A pause. "Not from your apartment. That information came from elsewhere." Relief mingled with confusion in Weber's mind. "Then why are you still here? Why take the risk of returning?" "To warn you," she repeated, "and because I need your help to leave Berlin safely. The checkpoints have been doubled, and my previous papers are now known to security forces." The audacity of her request left Weber momentarily speechless. "You're asking me to commit treason." "I'm asking you to follow your conscience," Sophia countered. "You know this war is lost. You've seen the true reports. Continuing to fight only ensures more suffering on all sides." Before Weber could respond, the sound of vehicles pulling up outside drew them both to the window. 2 black cars had stopped in front of the building, and men in long coats emerged. Gestapo. "They've come for me," Sophia said, her composure cracking slightly. "Or perhaps for both of us." Weber made his decision in that moment, not out of political conviction or betrayal of oath, but from a simple human instinct that transcended the artificial boundaries of nation and ideology. "The service stairs," he said urgently. "They lead to the cellar which connects to the building next door. We can exit through there." Sophia looked at him with surprise. "You're helping me." "I'm preventing more bloodshed," Weber replied, already gathering essential items, identification papers, money, a small photograph of his family. "If what you say is true about the planned offensive, then perhaps more lives can be spared." They moved quickly through the darkened service stairwell, as heavy footsteps echoed from the main stairs. The cellar was damp and cold, illuminated only by Weber's pocket flashlight. They navigated through abandoned furniture and stacked crates until reaching a heavy door leading to the adjacent building. "It may be locked from the other side," Weber whispered. "Allow me," Sophia replied, removing a set of slender tools from her coat pocket. Within seconds, the lock yielded to her expertise. The neighboring building's cellar was mercifully empty, and they emerged onto a side street, just as shouts erupted from Weber's building. The Gestapo, discovering their quarry, had escaped. "We need to reach the Lichtenberg district," Sophia explained as they hurried through back alleys, keeping to shadows. "There's a safe house there where I can obtain new documents." "And then?" Weber asked. "Then I cross into Switzerland. My work here is finished." They navigated through the darkened city, avoiding patrols and checkpoints. Weber realized that his uniform, which had always granted him free passage, was now a liability. He had crossed an invisible line, becoming in an instant what he had been trained to hunt. During their journey, Weber learned more about Sophia. She had been a university student when Poland was invaded in 1939. After her parents were killed during the occupation, she had escaped to the Soviet Union, where her language skills and intelligence had made her valuable to Soviet military intelligence. "I don't fight for Stalin or Soviet ideology," she explained during a brief rest in an abandoned warehouse. "I fight against those who destroyed my home and murdered my family." "And after the war?" Weber asked. "What then?" Sophia's expression softened. "I want to finish my studies, perhaps teach literature as you taught mathematics, build something instead of undermining it." The simple humanity of her ambition struck Weber powerfully. This woman whom he should consider an enemy, shared the same fundamental hopes he himself harbored. They reached the Lichtenberg safe house shortly before midnight, a nondescript apartment above a bakery. An elderly man answered their knock, his eyes widening at the sight of Weber's civilian clothes worn over a partially visible military uniform. "He's with me," Sophia assured the man in German. "He helped me escape." The old man nodded reluctantly. "The others have already departed. We received word that the network has been compromised." "Can you still provide documents?" Sophia asked urgently. "Yes, but only what I have on hand." The man retrieved a hidden compartment behind a bookshelf. "One set of papers for Swiss border crossing. I wasn't expecting an additional person." Weber understood the implication immediately. "Give them to her. I'll find another way." "Thomas, no." Sophia began to protest. "My knowledge of military procedures gives me advantages you don't have," Weber insisted. "I can create a plausible explanation for my movements if necessary." The reality, which both understood but neither voiced, was that Weber's chances of escaping Germany were far slimmer than hers. As a military officer absent without leave, he would face execution if captured. The elderly man provided Sophia with new identification papers identifying her as Helena Schmidt, a German national returning to family in Zurich. He also gave them information about a sympathetic truck driver departing for the Swiss border at dawn. As they prepared to separate, Sophia to meet the truck, Weber to attempt his own escape, a moment of awkward tension fell between them. "I never intended for you to sacrifice your life for mine," Sophia said quietly. "Nor did I." Weber replied with a wry smile. "But here we are, a teacher and a student, each learning something unexpected about duty and conscience." "If we survive this, Thomas Weber," Sophia said, removing his military coat and returning it to him, "look for me in Zurich after the war. I'll be teaching at the university, under whatever name I can claim by then." Weber accepted the coat, feeling the weight of both the garment and the moment. "I shall, though I suspect Germany will not be welcome in Switzerland for many years to come." "Not Germany," Sophia corrected him. "Just you, the man who offered his coat to a shivering woman without asking who she was or what side she fought for." With a final glance between them, acknowledging all that had transpired and all that remained unsaid, they parted. Sophia slipped into the pre-dawn darkness toward her rendezvous with the truck driver, while Weber turned toward the railway station, his military coat hidden in a bundled newspaper and a fabricated travel order in his pocket. 3 days later, a brief report crossed the desk of Colonel Brandt. Lieutenant Thomas Weber, after assisting in the security review, had requested and received emergency leave to search for his brother, reported missing in Italy. The request had been granted by Major Hoffmann given Weber's exemplary service record. The suspected Soviet agent remained at large, though the intelligence network had been dismantled, with several arrests made. What the report couldn't mention, was that Weber had no intention of returning to Berlin or his post. Using his knowledge of military protocols and document procedures, he had forged papers that would get him as far as the French border. What happened after that would depend on courage, luck, and perhaps the lessons learned from a chance encounter on a snowy bridge. 6 years later, in the spring of 1950, Thomas Weber, now working as a mathematics teacher at a small school in Geneva under the name Thomas Weiss, received an unmarked envelope containing only a newspaper clipping about faculty appointments at the University of Zurich and a small note reading simply, "Some offers of warmth continue long after the cold has passed." The signature was merely the letter S. The following weekend, Weber traveled to Zurich, where he found Sophia, now Dr. Sofia Novakova, professor of comparative literature, waiting at a cafe near the university. The world they had known during that February in Berlin was gone, transformed by defeat and division. Yet here they sat as survivors, and in their own small way perhaps as victors as well. "I kept my promise," Sophia said as Weber approached her table. "As did I," he replied, taking the seat across from her, "though it took longer than either of us might have expected." They talked for hours, about the past they had escaped, the present they had built from its ashes, and possibly, just possibly, a future neither had dared imagine during those desperate days in Berlin. The simple act of offering a coat to a shivering woman had altered the course of both their lives, a reminder that even in the darkest times, human connection remains the most powerful force of all. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.